Is your home in need of serious repairs? Marana's housing rehabilitation program helps qualifying residents with essential fixes like roofing, heating and cooling, electrical work, and water heaters at no cost to you. See if you qualify today at maranaaz.gov/CDBG and keep your home safe and comfortable.
People lose their valuables every day simply because they forget to lock their car doors. Don't be another statistic. Remove all your belongings anytime you leave your car, including weapons. This is a message from the Marana Police Department, reminding you to lock it or lose it.
Welcome to Real Talk with the Town, where I sit down with Marana staff to answer your burning questions about our beautiful community. My name is Terry Rozema, and I'm the town manager for the town, so let's get started.
Welcome to Real Talk with the Town. My name is Vic Hathaway, and I'm the communications manager for the town of Marana. I'm joined today with Terry Rozema, our town manager, and the usual host of the show. Hello, Terry.
Hello, Vic.
And today we're joined by Jane Fairall, our town attorney. Hello, Jane.
Hi, Vic.
And we're also joined by Jason Angell, our development services director, and arguably our most popular guest on the show based on the viewership for our What's Going Up in Marana series. Hello, Jason.
I'm still waiting for my award. But
You shouldn't have told him that. He's going to get a
sorry.
big head now.
Lesson learned. All right. So before we get started, though, I'm going to pass this over to Terry to talk about why we're here with you today.
All right. Thanks, Vic. Yeah, I think this is a really important topic, and it's an important topic, obviously. This is the second time we've been talking about it. We did an episode a number of weeks or so back on September 15th, and it's episode 80, in case any of you are interested in going back and listening to that. And I do encourage you to do that because a lot of people have come up with questions throughout this process, and I will tell you that the vast majority of the questions that have come up during the last couple of weeks are all answered in that episode. Nonetheless, I think we're going to try to do our best today to try and answer more of those questions because we recognize that data centers it's a hot topic. It's a hot topic not just for the town of Marana, but it's a hot topic nationwide, and we want to make sure that we're adequately addressing the concerns of our residents. Just recently, there was a application that went before the city of Tucson. Specifically, there was a request for annexation so that they could do a data center in the city of Tucson. That annexation failed. However, just I think yesterday or the day before, Pima County actually approved that project. I think it's still called Project Blue. I'm not 100% sure, but they just approved that project to move forward. So data centers are coming to Pima County. We have this application. At the time that we did our episode on September the 15th, we did not have any applications, but we do have one now. It went before the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission approved that to move forward, and it's going to go before the council now in sometime in the new year. So we've received a lot of questions, and that's what we're here to do today, is to try and answer some of those questions. And Vic is going to moderate this and ask us these tough questions, and hopefully we'll have good answers for you.
Are you guys ready?
I'm ready.
Yes, ready.
Ready. Okay.
All right, let's get started. On Wednesday, December 10th, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved a recommendation to the Town Council for a data center project. What is this project, and who are the stakeholders?
yeah, the project is two different parcels. Each of them is 300 acres approximately each, so a total of 600 acres for a data center campus to be constructed and operated on that. The two different landowners that are located there are, one is the Kai Family Trust, LLC, and the other is the Latter-day Saints Church owns the other 300 acres.
Does anybody live right around that area?
There is the closest residential property, existing residence is about a mile away from the subject property.
Specifically related to the landowners, one of the names that was mentioned was Kai Family Trust, and we have a member of our council, Herb Kai, who is a part of that. So, Jane, can you kind of talk about that? Because that question has come up a few times. Isn't that a conflict? And if so, how do we handle that?
Yes, that is a conflict under Arizona's conflict of interest statutes. And Councilmember Kai has declared a conflict in this matter, which is on file with the town clerk's office. And what it means is that he can't participate in any deliberations or discussions or voting on this matter as a council member. And he hasn't. So that is the result of the fact that he owns one of the 300-acre parcels, and it is the adjacent to the other 300-acre parcel, which would be a part of the same project.
And this project is going to be located pretty close to the freeway, correct? Is there anything else around it?
That is correct. It's just to the west of I-10. Also, in between the interstate and the subject property is the Veterans Memorial Cemetery. That is the only other existing land use operation that is near the subject site, other than there's an existing quarry operation to the north along Pinal Air Park Road. And then to the west, there is a large solar field operation that is there. All other surrounding property is currently being utilized as farmland or active farmland.
Okay. So walk us through the process that got this data center project to this point.
So on October 10th of this year, the town received the two applications that are currently going through the public process right now. When those applications were received, town staff reviewed them like they would any other application to make sure that they're in full compliance and they're a complete application, meaning they have provided all related information or all necessary information for the town to consider this. There was some back and forth as far as reviews, saying we need clarification on certain things or we need additional information on things. That then requires a second submittal, or in this case, it took 3 submittals to come in before it was ultimately ready to proceed to the public process. That then led to where we just recently were, where it was the first public meeting was the Planning Commission held last week. And then the next meeting after that, because the Plan Commission is a recommending body, will take their recommendation to the January 6th Town Council meeting.
So for it to have gotten this far, it means it's abided by the requirements in the data center ordinance.
That is correct. Yes, they've provided all information as outlined by the ordinance as far as the requirements for a complete application.
So one of the comments, Jason, that was brought up in, I think it was in the Planning Commission meeting, it may have been at one of the other call to the audiences, is that there weren't many people that showed up for the public meeting that Beal and them had. And there was 10 people that showed up and said, that's not enough. So what is kind of the requirement for that? Why do you think there's only 10 people that showed up? Do you have any ideas or thoughts on that? How do you respond to and answer a question like that or a point that's made about the number of people that showed up for a public meeting?
Yeah, that's a good question. As part of our public engagement process, public notification requirements for the town, where we go a little bit above what state statute requires, and that is they are required for any land use application to do a public information meeting or a neighborhood meeting. They are required to notify all property owners within 300 feet of the subject site. And so they sent out a notice to those property owners within 300 feet. And these are large parcels up there in this part of our community. So when you notify 300, do a radius of 300 feet around the subject property, there's not that many different property owners up there. So to hear that there was only, maybe 10 people that showed up or participated in that meeting, that doesn't surprise me. I understand the residents are asking, it's not meant to be a community meeting. It's meant for the applicant to be able to speak with their neighbors and let them know what their proposal is and what's going on. So a smaller neighborhood meeting is what we ask the applicant to do.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, so this project has resulted in a lot of feedback from residents and neighboring communities who have presented their concerns to the town of Marana. So I'm just going to go through these questions with you. The first one being, will this project be water cooled?
We've answered that, I think, a couple of different times, but to be straight on it here, this is an air-cooled facility that they are proposing. It is not a water-cooled facility.
And I'm going to jump in here on that one too, because I think it's probably one of the most misunderstood elements of this whole project and the wastefulness of water relative to data centers. And I'm not saying that they don't use a lot of water, because if it is a water-cooled system, they do use a lot of water. That being said, I think Marana is in a different situation. At some point, a water-cooled system data center may apply, and if that's the case, it'll go through the same process and we'll evaluate it. And they are not, our ordinance is very specific, they are not allowed to use Marana water, but they could use the irrigation district water. And here's where I think there's a very significant difference and distinction, at least for our community. With the irrigation district that is watering all of the cotton fields and other farm fields throughout Marana, hundreds and thousands of acres, there's a lot of water that goes onto those properties. This 600-acre parcel that is being proposed for the data centers, for example, would use actually more water than a water-cooled data center would. And then you have the added benefit for the town, meaning the residents of the town, that the water that is used from the irrigation district would then be sent to the wastewater treatment plant and recharged, and the town would get recharge credits for that water. So there is a plus to the town for a water-cooled system. That's not what this particular system is, but I do think it's important for people to try and understand the different ways these systems work and what the potential benefits can be to a community.
So this project cannot use Marana water for its cooling system, and it's going to be using CMID water for its irrigation system, but it can still use Marana water for its like bathroom sinks, those kinds of things, correct?
Yeah, the general office operation is allowed to use potable water or potable water as part of the operation.
Okay. Marana Water will be seeing a rate increase pretty soon in January that will go before council. As we covered in our November 11th episode, we talked about why is Marana Water Department raising their rates. So in the event that we do get a data center and they are using Marana Water for potable purposes, will Marana Water have to do another rate increase once a data center comes to Marana?
Absolutely not. That's not a business or an entity using water for their toilets, for their sinks, for drinking, for washing hands, those kinds of things. That's not something that's going to result in any kind of rate increase for the town. And, we covered it in depth. So if people want to go and listen to that episode about water and water rates, it spells it out very clearly why those rates are being raised. And it has nothing to do with the data center project.
Moving from water to our other utility, electricity. How much electricity will be needed for this project, and can our current infrastructure support it? So we're having 2 electrical companies serving this project, correct? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, the 300 acres to the north is served by Trico Electric, and the property to the south, the 300 acres to the south, is within TEP's service area. So there are 2 different power providers that are there. What each subject property, each of the 300 acres has from the utility provider, provided a letter acknowledging that they're in communications and working with them to go through their process to evaluate this. The range that they've provided for both sites is 550 to 750 megawatts, which we've had conversations with TEP and Trico regarding that. They're going through their process to evaluate that, and there will have to be system upgrades in order to deliver that, but to the extent of what that all entails, I'm not aware of that, and it has been communicated to the town what that would all entail. But we do know, as shown in the plans, that there would be substations included in the data center development that would allow them to receive and control the power as it's regulated into the facilities there.
And just to add to that, the providers, Trico and TEP, will have to enter into energy service agreements with the data center developers. And then those agreements are regulated and approved by the Arizona Corporation Commission with the goal of not passing on the costs of the data center electricity to other ratepayers of the providers.
And that is probably one of the most important elements of this whole process and project, and one of the ones we hear the most from residents is it going to affect me? Is it going to make my rates go up? And we're, by far, none of us are electric experts, but I think if people are interested in knowing more and hearing more, both Trico and TEP have put a lot of information up on their websites. I would encourage people to go there, look at that information, and they detail very specifically exactly what Jane was just talking about. Their agreements that they have to enter into, the approval process they have to go through to make sure that residents are not affected and their rates do not go up as a result of the data centers.
Additional environmental impacts have been brought up, including air and soil pollution. What concerns do we have for these projects?
So those are probably difficult questions for us to answer because it's not our area of expertise. Our understanding based on what we've heard and what we've been told is that they've gone through all of their studies and there's no negative impact to the environment from the operations of these facilities. There are entities that regulate that they would have to come into compliance with, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. But from what we're being told and what we understand, this is not a gross negative impact to the environment.
Do we anticipate building these data centers will bring more traffic and therefore impact our roads?
As part of the application, they do have to do a traffic analysis and submit that document to our staff for review. And there are impacts like any other development. The bigger impacts for this type of project would be at the time of construction. And so we have had conversations with our traffic engineer as well as the BO representatives about the possibility of staggering the start and end of work days so that their construction traffic isn't commingled with what is our standard peak hour traffic. When you think about areas where they would have to come in to access the site coming off of like Marana Road, Marana Interchange, or even up at Pinell Interchange there's already some questions and concerns regarding morning commuting traffic accessing those areas. But once the facility is up and fully operational, the trips per day are really very little, just because I think it matches up. Well, it does match up with the employment numbers that are there.
All right, let's talk about noise concerns. My understanding is these data centers will be emitting some level of noise. So what can we experience for this?
We do, as part of the ordinance, also have specific decibel readings based upon adjacent uses to the subject property where they cannot exceed certain decibel readings. They have provided a noise study as part of the application, and they illustrate what their projected noise readings are to be at adjacent property lines. Some of the noise readings that were shown, like along the south and the east, are at 55 decibels. And for those that are, what is 55 decibels? 55 decibels is a standard conversation that you would have, just generally not screaming, not yelling. It's a normal conversation. In comparison, though, vehicular traffic on a road, a general residential road, reads at about 70 decibels. And as we talked about a little bit earlier on, this subject site is also in close proximity to I-10. I don't know exactly what those decibel readings are, but they will be greater than 70 decibels in that area. But there are noise concerns that we are fully aware of. We anticipated in drafting this ordinance, and that's why we have specific decibel reading maximum limits that they're allowed to read at their subject property line.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to that because it has been a topic that's been brought up by at least a couple of residents, maybe more in some of the call of the audience, and that is disrupting the peaceful nature of a cemetery and disturbing the people who are at rest there and the people that go to visit. And, listening to Jason's explanation of the decibel level at 55 at the boundary of a normal conversation, then you add the distance of the roadway itself, and then you add the landscaping buffers and everything that are all around the cemetery and the distance from the property line of the cemetery to the actual grave sites, you have an even greater distance. So I think Jason's exactly right. The impact of a conversational level noise compared to the noise of the freeway, which is right next to the cemetery. My guess is, I'm not a noise expert, but I believe, and it makes sense, that you are going to hear the noise of the freeway much greater than you're going to hear any noise from the facility itself.
So speaking of noise, this facility will have generators on site in the event that they lose electricity. Can you speak to the use of these generators? How loud are they allowed to get? How often are they allowed to be used?
The data center ordinance that we adopted does address the use of generators. They are only allowed to be used as emergency backup. They're not allowed to be used as part of the day-to-day operations of the facility. They have to be tested from time to time, and we did limit testing of the generators to daytime hours, Monday through Friday, so that any noise that's created by the testing would have limited impacts to the community. And we also added in the ordinance that if diesel generators are being used, and generators are another area where technology is changing all the time, but if diesel generators are used, they have to be Tier 4 or newer type of diesel generators. And what that refers to is emission standards. The EPA has promulgated emission standard for diesel generators, and Tier 4 are the most up-to-date with the lowest amount of emissions into the air. And so we require that if there are going to be diesel generators used for backup only.
Another question we've been asked is why would we want to reduce farming in Marana in exchange for a data center, especially when it comes to the water usage argument, whereas farming takes up a lot more water than data centers. My understanding is that the town of Marana is not the one choosing to eliminate farming in exchange for data centers. So can you speak a little bit to this question?
Sure. I think that's a great question, because as you drive through Marana, one of the things that's kind of cool is seeing those open fields and crops growing and things of that nature. So it's not the desire of the town to do away with farmland. That's not our goal. That's not anything we have even any control over. The fact of the matter is there are people that own that land, and they have the right to sell that land and to do something different with that land if they go through the appropriate processes. And it's interesting to me that when people bring that up, they forget that the very houses that they're living in, say in Gladden Farms, was indeed a farm. It was actually farm fields. So that it's just the nature of growth. And when you think about Marana and its nearly 50 years of existence, most of the farm fields that were once farmed in the beginning are no longer farm fields, because that's what growth results in. And it's not an active desire that's in our hearts and minds. It's just the reality of growth in a community that people want to live in.
What kind of impacts can we expect to see on wildlife crossings in the area that these data centers will be going in?
As part of the application, they also have to submit an environmental assessment. We do have environmental staff on staff here that review it against the adopted plans and policies of the town to make sure that it's in conformance. They also make sure that it remains in compliance with any state regulations that are there as well. So they do have to do that. We have reviewed it. They're showing no impacts to animal corridors or environmental impacts. And, they'll continue to review those along the way as they get further into, if this project gets approved and proceeds into construction phases. The environmental is reviewed all the way along as part of grading permits, construction permits, and then our staff are constantly monitoring it out in the field as well as part of the process.
All right. Now that we've gone over issues with the data centers themselves, let's talk about regulation. So how will the town enforce the data center ordinance in the event that this project does not meet requirements after it's built, such as the noise is too loud or they decide to switch to water cooling after they've already built out for air?
Well, I can answer that the data center ordinance and the town's zoning code, any failure to meet the requirements of those documents, the data center ordinance is in the zoning code, or a failure to meet a requirement of a rezoning ordinance if a project is approved and there's a rezoning ordinance. Those are violations of code. They're civil infractions, and so they can be cited for violations, cited into court. Each day that a violation continues is a separate violation, could be a separate citation for each and every day until a problem is fixed. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of this type of code enforcement, code violations in the town of Marana, and I've been here for 20 years, and we've had very few cases where we've had to really go far down a road. Typically, you start with discussions and with notices of violation with the goal of having the business remedy whatever the violation is or whatever the requirement that they're not meeting. And usually those discussions and possibly a letter or notice of violation do result in the violation being fixed and remedied, and we move on. But we can, as I said, issue citations, which can result in fines. If that doesn't work and you continue to fine and fine and fine again, there are greater violations, and it's usually kind of on a scale, escalating to greater enforcement actions, I should say. So up to, with revoking a business license. And then the business can't operate in the town of Marana lawfully. It's essentially a means of shutting it down if you're going to ignore all of our attempts to enforce the requirements. And as I said, I can think of maybe one time in 20 years where we've had to go that far with a business. And I might be wrong, I might be misremembering, but it's been very rare. And if there's a order to abate a violation from a court, once you've gone through that civil infraction process, and there's a violation of an order to abate, then it can even turn into a criminal proceeding at that point, which could have jail time associated with it. So there are remedies. I'm not saying any of that is simple or easy, but there is a process that can be followed if a business, any business, doesn't comply with zoning code, with the rezoning ordinance, in this case with the data center ordinance. And the team at the town would work with the legal department, and we would take whatever actions we need to take to protect the public and to make sure that the requirements of the council are met.
So Jane, appreciate that answer. One of the things that has been asked a couple of times is what's to keep them from going from a closed loop system, an air conditioning system, to a water cooled system?
Right. So the current application and specific plans for the Luckett Road North and South are written to have air cooling, the closed loop air cooling system. So if those are approved, that's what they are bound to at that time. So any desire to change from the air cooled to the water cooled would be a specific plan amendment, which would have to go back through the rezoning process in order to get approved, back through everything, commission, council, staff review before it gets to commission, then council, with the public hearings, same process that we're doing now. And I think, not to speak for the developers in this case, but they're spending a lot of money to do an air-cooled system, so it's not an easy switch to change their mind. That would have to be done very early in the process before a bunch of money is spent to implement an air-cooled system.
Yeah, and just I think, probably logically speaking, that's an awesome technical answer and legal answer. But logically speaking, it doesn't make any sense that you would spend tens of millions of dollars in all likelihood to set up a air-cooled system for 10 buildings and then turn around and spend a whole bunch more money to pull all that out and put and a whole bunch more money than to put in a water-cooled system. I mean, so logically, it doesn't make sense to do something like that. So this ordinance that we have, I think, is great, and it helps us to regulate. But here's one of the concerns that I have, and it's something that I think is starting to gain traction nationally. And Jane, perhaps you can speak a little bit to this because you told me you went to a recent conference where this came up. If communities push too hard against a certain industry, we saw this with cell towers. I think we're starting to see it right now with fiber optic. If communities push too hard against an industry, what ends up happening, and what could happen if everybody just shuts down the idea of any data centers any place?
Right. As you mentioned, I recently went to International Municipal Lawyers Association conference, and this was a topic of discussion because data center development is obviously a hot topic around the country. And there is concern from people who work in my line of business as attorneys for municipalities that the federal government is going to come in and occupy the field and preempt our ability to regulate these facilities in any way. Oftentimes, they'll allow you some local zoning abilities, but they take away, like you mentioned with the cell towers. We're very limited in what we're allowed to address in cell tower development within the town because the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, issued an order many years ago that preempts that field and occupies that field for the federal government. So there is concern, and as I said, around the country with municipal attorneys that we're going to have less discretion and less ability to deal with data centers and to have say in where they go and to say things like you can't use our potable water for your cooling systems, that some of those, those requirements, might be taken away from us.
Yeah, and I think that is a very important point for us to keep in mind. And it's also an important thing for, I think, our residents to know and understand. And I do believe that we've been very thoughtful in this, and we have been very reasonable. And to have as much say-so as possible, I think, is important to us because we don't want a community filled with data centers. And so to allow them where we think it makes sense, again, I think it's been a very thoughtful, measured approach. And I hope we continue to get that flexibility and freedom to have that level of control.
All right, we're going to move away from some issues that have been concerned about the data centers themselves and more into some speculative questions that have been presented. There are concerns that we are currently in an AI tech bubble, and therefore any data center built in Marana can later be abandoned. So what would happen in this instance?
Yeah, I think, that's actually a really, really good question, and I like that question. The reason I like it is it's one of the ones that I've thought about extensively because it's something you don't have control over. That being said, data centers aren't just built for the purposes of AI, they're built also for the storage of data, and cloud storage we're running short of cloud storage, and that's because, Vic, you have too many cat videos and things like that. But in all reality, these data centers are necessary because of what we do every day with our computers and with our phones and the videos we create and all of those things. So are data centers going to go away because there's an AI bubble? No more than, the internet went away when there was the dot-com bubble, right? The internet didn't disappear because of the dot-com bubble. So data centers are here to stay. However, if the technology suddenly changes and they don't need that amount of space anymore, it would be very similar to any other facility that is built in our community that is like a Walmart, a Target, a Bash's, for example, that we have here in our own community that's not being utilized right now, right? You find a way to repurpose that building for something else.
There is a perception that town council already knows how they want to vote. So why even do this public process? What do you say to that perception?
Yeah, I can understand why people might think that way and feel that way. But I think one of the things that people are not thinking about is the reality that the town has been considering and evaluating and researching the potential for this for quite some time, a couple of years now. And it first came to our attention a couple of years ago. And so the evaluation of that, the gathering of information, the discussions about it, all of those things have been taking place for the last couple of years. So as that information has become increasingly available as we've gone along, the council has been briefed on that information. They've been told, okay, here's what we're finding out, here's what we're seeing, here's what we're hearing, here's what we found. This is our data center ordinance. This is why we put these things in. They approve that data ordinance. So they end up with a lot of information going into the public hearings. And you can't get all that information and then read all of the council packets without formulating some sort of an opinion. You're going to go into this with some sort of an idea of where you stand on this. You can't possibly read all that information and just have a blank mind about it without any. But I think the public meetings are for the purposes of the public coming in and expressing either their support of it or their non-support of it and listening to what they have to say. And I think people are coming in with questions, and they're questions that we have already thought about and considered and come up with what we believe are good answers to, or we wouldn't be going this far down the track. So I realize that people think that if they end up ruling against somebody who's in the crowd that doesn't want it, that therefore they already made up their minds and they didn't listen to the people. And that's just simply not the case. The other thing I think that's really important is people show up to the meetings and they oppose a certain thing. In this case, it's data centers. And what they fail to recognize is that the 50 or 80 or 100 people who are in the meeting and those who stand up and oppose it, there's a whole nother group of people who support it. And maybe they're not as vocal because that's just kind of the nature of support and opposition on these types of things. And the council spends a lot of time talking to people in the community. So they're listening not only to the voices that show up on the day of a public hearing, but they're having conversations with people in the community who have a position on it as well. And they represent not only the people that show up at the public hearings, but they represent also the people that they talk to in the community leading up to these things to get their input and their thoughts. So I think it's a lot more complex than just I showed up, there were 30 people that opposed and 15 people that supported, therefore they should vote against it. That's just not the way it works.
There are concerns about secrets and backdoor deals involving money as to why the town would want to do this project. What money gets exchanged, if any?
Yeah, this is one of those things that comes up with probably just about every project where there is money, and there's money in virtually every project. And you hear people say, all you care about is the money in lining your pockets. And, the reality is there is money involved in this project, but it's not money that is lining the pockets of individuals who work for the town, individuals who are on the town council making the decision on this particular issue. But there is money that is going to benefit this community as a whole. We can talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But the operator of the facility is going to pay money. They're going to pay property taxes. And those property taxes go to pay for a lot of things, including infrastructure, including schools and fire protection and things of that nature. The town itself doesn't have a property tax, but we're going to benefit through a utility tax, and we're going to benefit through a lease tax. Those monies come to the town for the betterment of the residents of our town. That's the vision for this organization, is to elevate the quality of life for our residents, and we will put that money to good use to do that. We have infrastructure that is deteriorating or is woefully inadequate. If you think about just, for example, Marana I-10, and we'll talk about the amount of money here in a minute. I think you're probably leading up to that. But those monies can be put toward fixing some of those things, and that's a benefit to the community. It's not a direct benefit to any council member that's making the decision on this. It's not the benefit of anybody sitting in this room. Jane Fairall's not going to get a big bump in her bank account as a result of this. Jason Angell is not going to, be taking more vacations to the Bahamas because of this. It's just the natural exchange of money as a result of land sales. Construction of the facilities is going to bring money into the town that will benefit our residents. Construction sales tax is a significant portion of this as well.
Okay, so understanding all of this, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved recommendation of this project to go to Town Council. So let's talk about the reasons why. Terry, we were talking earlier about money, so let's go into money. What can we hope to see out of this project?
Yeah, you know what? I think we've done kind of a bad job of selling that piece of the equation here. We've talked a lot about that it doesn't have the kind of negative impacts that maybe people believe they have. But on the positive side of things, there is benefit to communities that end up with data centers. And yeah, I mentioned some of them already relative to property tax and where those property taxes go. And all you have to do is pull up your property tax bill and just go down the line and look at all the people that are going to benefit from those things, the schools and the fire districts and so on and so forth, and the flood control district and those things. But the town of Marana specifically is going to benefit, and I mentioned the two taxes earlier, the lease tax and the utility tax. The utility tax is going to bring in roughly, for this specific project, based on the amount of electricity they use, roughly $12 million a year. Then you have a lease tax that we have here in the town. So the Beal Infrastructure is the company that's constructing the infrastructure in the buildings, and they're going to lease that then to a tenant. And that equates to roughly $2.5 million a year. So, you're looking in the neighborhood of $14-15 million coming into the town on an annual basis once this project is built out. And to put that into context, the total amount of sales tax in the town of Marana in a given year, just last year, was $47.5 million. So 15 million added into your 47.5 million, that's a third of what we're bringing in of our retail sales tax. So if you just think about it from the standpoint of, this is my budget, I have, or this is my salary, I make I'm just going to use really round numbers, $100,000 a year, and all of a sudden you get an additional $33,000 a year added to your income, that's a significant thing. And what kinds of things? People go, well, where's that money going to go? What are you going to do with that? You're going to line your pockets. Again, hopefully we've covered that. It's not coming to individuals in the town. It's going to be reinvested into the community. So we can build better parks. So we can build, maybe the council wants to build another community and aquatic center on the southern portion of our community. Maybe they want to fix Marana interchange because that's a real problem for us. Ensuring high levels of public safety, ensuring that our roads are well maintained and taken care of. So, all of those things. We have a lot of infrastructure projects in this town, and right now we don't have a great way to pay for all of those. So, additional monies coming into the town that are going to help support those things and raise the quality of life for our residents. That's a huge plus.
All right, so let's talk economic development. Is there a potential by having these data centers here to attract other industries like manufacturing or high-tech jobs?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely the ability to attract additional jobs or additional industries to come in, as we've seen in other communities, just in the Phoenix Valley area. When there's been data center projects that have been going in, there's been new or additional businesses that have also co-located or been constructed within the community based upon the technology that has been introduced with these data centers.
And for the project itself, how many jobs do you think we could expect to see?
The construction jobs are estimated at 4,500, approximately 4,600 construction jobs. And, this is a big project that would take roughly 7 to 10 years to build out is what they're conveying to us. So it's quite a few number of jobs. And I think as one gentleman spoke during the public hearing, and I appreciated the way he stated it, our construction jobs in our community are all dependent upon finding additional work and projects to keep them as full-time employees. They're good paying jobs. They're family supporting wages. So we shouldn't, kind of dismiss the value of those construction jobs. So I get it. Some look at it and say, well, those are temporary. Temporary to some, but they're important to others.
I like what he said. He said people are indicating that all of these construction jobs are temporary jobs. And he said, aren't all construction jobs temporary jobs?
Yeah.
Right? You build something, you move on to something else. You build it, you move on to something else. So,
yeah. And then once the project is fully operational, it's about 400 jobs that will be on site. And those are everything from the security personnel that are there all the way up to the engineers and the programmers that will have to maintain the guts of the data center operation. And that was estimated at the average salary of about $75,000 a year. So they're high paying, good paying jobs, family supporting wages that would be introduced to this community.
Is that considered a lot of jobs for a project of this size? And is this an industry that the town of Marana is therefore targeting?
Well, it is not an industry that the town has targeted. I'm not an economic development expert, but 400 jobs for 600 acres is not a lot of jobs. There are other industries that for that amount of space and size of building, you would have more jobs. And that's why this came up a bit at the public hearing before the Planning Commission as well. The town does have an economic development program that's called the Marana Job Creation Incentive Program, where we provide certain incentives to what we call targeted employers, which are employers that we're trying to attract and retain in Marana. We actually, in 2024, at the same time that we adopted our data center ordinance, we took an amendment to the Job Creation Incentive Program to exclude data centers, specifically saying those aren't exactly the targeted employers that we're trying to get into the town of Marana. So we are not going to provide any of those incentives to data centers.
Do we know who will ultimately be operating this data center?
They have not indicated an end user for this project. And I know in Tucson, when they were going through there was the whole, it's going to be Amazon, and Amazon is now backed out and all that. There has been no conversations. They have not divulged anything to us, nor have we asked as a staff. It's not our position, I guess, to determine who is the end user. A data center is a data center. Doesn't matter who it's operated by.
What can the public expect from here looking forward? When will that town council meeting be taking place?
As I said earlier, we're looking for town council the applications to go before town council on January 6th. The public hearing notices to the newspaper were actually just sent out yesterday by staff, so it'll be published on Monday in the newspaper. Those will also be going up on the town's website and posted outside of our facilities here in the next day or so. By statute, we have a 15-day notice requirement, so we're well in advance of that requirements, and we wanted to do that with the holidays and everything going on. It's a complicated schedule. And then we will also send out our direct mailing notices, which go to all property owners within 300 feet. That is a statutory requirement as well. And we also have changed the sign that is posted out on the property that was originally for the Plan Commission meeting. It now states that it's for the January 6th Town Council meeting at 6 p.m. here in the same council chambers.
And people can watch it online, but if they want to participate and speak, they need to show up in person, correct?
Correct. Yes. If people want to speak at the meeting, we would encourage them to be here prior to the meeting starting and filling out the speaker's card. We'll be working with the clerk's office to make sure that we have a similar kind of setup to what we did at Plan Commission, anticipating a larger crowd and making sure we have staff available to help gather those cards and get them in. So anybody that wants to speak has an opportunity to speak at the meeting.
And for anybody who wants to get more information on this project and data centers in Marana in general, all this information is on our website, maranaaz.gov, or you can visit specifically maranaaz.gov/data centers.
I will add to that too, Vic, is as our notices state, Matt Taylor, our planning manager, is the one that is leading the application and coordinating the review. His contact information is included in all the public information meetings or notices that go out, but they can also contact myself and the Development Services Department. I have had 2 people, actually, that have come in and asked for time to sit down and talk with me about the project and want to go through it and better understand it. And our staff is always available to do that. I can't do it for 600 people. My day is not long enough for that. But anyone that wants to come in and sit down and talk with us, we are more than willing to do that. And we actually encourage that to better understand the full application that is going before the council.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, 3 of you, for answering these questions. We hope we did a good job collecting the questions that we were receiving from the public. If you continue to have more questions, please send them to maranaaz.gov/realtalk, and we will do our best to answer them as soon as we can. I'm going to segue back to you, Terry. You can take your podcast back.
Well, thanks, Vic. I really appreciate you serving as the mediator, not the mediator, what's the word? Moderator. Thank you. Thank you for serving as our moderator here today. And I'll just say, I know that this is a very sensitive topic for some people, and the town gets that. We understand that. It's why, quite frankly, we went through so much effort and energy leading up to even getting an application and knowing that the possibility of them coming to Marana has been there for some time. And people have asked me my thoughts on it. I will tell you that, I 100% support this particular data center project. And I think it's because we've done our homework. All the questions that people have come in and asked us are all questions and concerns that we had going into this. And we spent a lot of time making sure we had good answers to those questions before we move forward. So I am in a position where I feel very comfortable with it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that every person in our community is going to feel that level of comfort. And we understand that. But I think ultimately for the town, I think we need to make decisions that are in the best interest for the town long term. And we'll see, January 6th, what the council ends up doing. They may decide not to do it. And we'll just take it from there. But I do appreciate Jane and Jason being here, helping us answer all the questions, and you asking the questions of us, Vic. So thank you to all of our residents and people that have showed up and participated intensely sometimes in this process. We appreciate that. Continue to do so. Until next time. Submit your questions by visiting maranaaz.gov/realtalk, and we'll answer them right here. To receive notifications for new releases, remember to hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Also, remember to follow the town on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram to stay up to date on current news and events.